I haven't eaten in over 24 hours and I am absolutely starving. Just kidding. I actually feel pretty awesome. Why is that? Because keto and fasting actually work if you do them correctly. But here's the truth. Keto and fasting can be incredible for fat burning, energy, metabolism, cognitive function, but they can also suck. And I mean really suck if you don't do them correctly. So today, let's talk about how to do keto and fasting so they can not suck and actually be awesome for you and your goals. Let's get into it. So first, let's talk about why keto versus fasting. The reason for this is because they have a number of things in common. The primary one is that if they're both done over a long period of time, the body will switch over to a metabolism known as ketosis, where you're utilizing fat stores that are stored in either your cellular tissue or fat from your food, in the case of keto, to utilize as energy as their primary fuel substrate. Now, this doesn't happen immediately during fasting or even once you start a ketogenic diet. It may take a few days for this process to start because your body has stored glycogen within your muscle and organ cells that it can utilize first. But at the end of the day, this is one of the primary similarities that ketogenic diets and fasting have in common. Now, before we go deeper, let's talk about exactly what I mean by a ketogenic diet. In this case, I'm going to define it as a ultra low carb diet. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30, maybe 40 grams of carbs per day. Some people can achieve ketosis with carb intakes higher than this, but typically very, very low carbs. Also moderate protein. And then number 3 is going to be moderate to high fat. So depending on the energy balance that you wish to achieve, if you want to be in a really big calorie deficit, you might have like moderate fat. Or if you want to be at about maintenance in terms of calories, you just want the other benefits of a keto diet, you'll have pretty high fats. And there's a couple types of keto diets. One is the standard ketogenic diet, which is essentially just what I outlined there. And then there's another 2 that are pretty common, the CKD, cyclical ketogenic diet, and TKD, the targeted ketogenic diet. These 2 essentially just utilize carbohydrates in a strategic way and with strategic timing in order to get a lot of the benefits of a ketogenic diet, but also have some of the benefits of carbohydrate intake. For the purposes of this video and the comparison, we're going to be talking about the standard ketogenic diet. Now let's contrast that with fasting, which is essentially just abstinence from food or abstinence from calories, essentially, for some period of time. Now again, there's multiple different types of fasting. There's continual fasting, which can either be water fasting or dry fasting, in which case you actually wouldn't be taking in water either. There's also intermittent fasting, which is essentially just a patterned way of eating such that you're not consuming calories for, let's say, 12 to 16, maybe even 18 hours of the day. And then the remainder of the day, you are consuming calories, but you're being very strict that you're not consuming any calories or any food during your fasting window. Now, something to note here is fasting is very natural for humans. Every night when you go to bed, you're fasting, unless somehow you have a IV of sugar running through your veins. But it's a very natural thing for humans. And because of that, we're very well accustomed to it and well adapted to it. Key takeaway on the similarity and why we're making this comparison is because both of these, ketogenic diets and fasting, can lead to a state of ketosis where your body's utilizing fat as opposed to carbohydrates for energy. Now, what are some of the key benefits of each? So for a ketogenic diet, you're gonna have massive impacts on blood sugar regulation in a very positive way once you're adapted to the diet after about the first week, maybe 2. You also have some protein intake when you're following a ketogenic diet, which is gonna be protective of your muscle tissue. And muscle is very important for metabolic health and overall health. In terms of benefits for fasting, it's actually going to have more rapid fat loss because the energy balance is going to be more negative. You're consuming 0 calories when you're fasting. Now, depending on your modality of fasting, this could change if you're doing intermittent fasting and still eating 6,000 calories, right? And also fasting, as I mentioned earlier, is generally well tolerated because our bodies are used to it. This is something that we've had to do throughout history to survive. But again, both conditions lead to this state of ketosis. And I want to talk about exactly what some of the benefits of ketosis are. But first, let's talk about how our body gets energy, or where it gets energy from rather. So under normal circumstances, when we're consuming energy, i.e. calories from food, that's our body's preferred source of energy. This is why we have so many mechanisms that regulate our hunger and tell us, hey, we need some calories right now. We need some energy from the environment, because otherwise we're gonna have to start burning through what we have internally. But let's talk about what those sources of energy are and why your body might want to use certain ones as opposed to other ones. So what if we looked at getting calories from the nervous system? Horrible idea. Nervous system is absolutely critical for everyday functioning, beating your heart, running the entire body. So your body's absolutely not going to use calories from the nervous system unless it has to. And at that point, you're basically going to die. So no, nervous system's out. Okay, what about from organs? Well, those are pretty important too. Like your heart beating and your kidneys filtering your blood and your liver. Like those are all kind of important, right? So, okay, no organs. What about muscle glycogen? This is essentially stored carbohydrate in our muscle tissues. Yeah, that one's actually okay. Your body's gonna prefer to use that only when it really needs to. So when you have a high performance demand, say you're running or sprinting or lifting something heavy, that's when it's really gonna wanna use glycogen because it knows that that's good stuff for when we need to do something very quick, like some sort of fight or flight reaction. So muscle glycogen's okay, but maybe not our top preference. What about from muscle tissue? Well, that's probably not the best option because again, you need that muscle to move. Like you need muscle to walk and pick up things. So probably not the best option. I'm gonna put 911 there for emergency use only. Really don't want to use that. What about fat tissue? Fat tissue's great. Fat tissue's literally just sitting there holding energy, waiting to be used. This is actually why our body stores fat, is for this specific purpose. So we can carry with us some excess calories from the times that we did have a lot of food. Our body's like, hey dude, we might need some extra energy later. And right now we got a lot of extra food. So like, let's overeat and gorge ourselves. This is the reason why it's a natural human tendency in a abundant food environment to overeat sometimes, because historically we haven't been in that environment. So your body actually, when you have excess calories, is going to store it as fat tissue because, hey, we might need that later. It's also going to replenish muscle glycogen because that's really good stuff and it's good for fast movement when we need it. So that's actually kind of how your body preferentially uses as well as stores energy from food in your calories. So now that we know that, let's bring it back to ketosis, because as I mentioned earlier, ketosis is when we're using that fat tissue as energy. Now I think it's also pertinent to mention autophagy here, which is essentially the process of recycling your own tissue. This doesn't happen as much during ketogenic diets when you're eating all the time, but during a prolonged period of fasting, autophagy is a huge benefit that contributes to some of the health outcomes that are associated with fasting. So essentially, if you think of this as like recycling, imagine maybe a junkyard where you could go pick up parts from bad cars, or in your body's context, bad cells, and add them to other healthy cells. So let's say we've got these cells over here, all 5 of these look super healthy and they were formed correctly. Something happened, something got janky with this one. So what your body's gonna do during this process of autophagy, it's already looking for fuel, and it's like, hey dude, this guy's not even made right. Can we just use him? Yeah, absolutely. So it'll disassemble that. Obviously this isn't just a one-to-one to make a new cell, but essentially your body's scavenging bad or broken or old or dying tissue from certain parts of the body, and it'll use that as either fuel or to actually structure new healthy proteins. So this is a really cool and honestly like ingenious mechanism that our body has to repair itself, heal damaged tissue, and sort of perform a cellular clean out. All right, so now let's finally talk about ketosis. So as we said before, carbs are very low and they're not abundantly available, but we do have a ton of stored energy in fat cells. So how's the process actually work? So we take fat from fat tissues, fat cells all throughout our body, and we dump them into the bloodstream in the form of fatty acids, essentially just little movable vesicles that can travel throughout our blood. Those end up eventually in our liver, where some conversions happen, and we create something called ketone bodies. There's a couple of them here, BHB, acetoacetate, and acetone, and these can now supply energy to the rest of our body. So this is now our new energy source that our body's gonna use for brain metabolism, muscle contraction, powering our organs, etc. Now you may have heard that the keto diet is kind of like mimicking starvation. I don't necessarily love the term starvation, but it is mimicking a metabolic pathway that our body has and utilizes when we're fasting, which is the ketosis pathway. So in some ways, they are quite similar in terms of metabolism. So now let's talk about what the effect of those ketones as an energy source have on our body. One of the huge ones that's very beneficial for most people is a decrease in insulin. This is because our body has no need for insulin, at high levels at least, because we're not storing a lot of carbohydrates. So we can drop insulin, that way nutrients, i.e. fat, is readily available to be used, and this will lead to more stable blood sugar levels, and for most people, more stable energy levels and even mood and potentially sleep regulations because of that. Ketone metabolism also often results in dramatically reduced inflammation for most people, especially when you consider that, for example, in the standard American diet, a large majority of the food that we consume is highly processed, highly enriched with sugar and other preservatives, colored food dyes, trans fats, all this kind of stuff that's pro-inflammatory. So part of it is just reducing those things from our diet, but also part of the inflammation reduction effect of either a ketogenic diet or fasting comes from the fact that ketones actually reduce inflammation throughout the body because they're a super efficient energy source. And a second order effect of the reduction of insulin, but also sort of a direct effect of ketones themselves, is for most folks a dramatic downregulation or reduction in hunger and an increase in satiety. So what's really interesting is if you've ever done a multi-day fast or if you've done a ketogenic diet, you'll notice sometimes that you're just not hungry. Like I said at the start of this video, I haven't eaten for about 24 hours and it's barely registering for me. Eventually, yeah, you will get hungry because your body will start to send you those hunger signals and say, hey, we need to replenish some fat stores. This is getting pretty serious. But for most people, fasting, even for extended periods of time, as long as you have water, electrolytes, some other important things kind of sorted out, it can actually be really healthy. Another key benefit that most folks notice during ketosis is positive gut microbiome changes, or let's just say gut microbiome changes, but typically they are positive. Now, again, part of this is because we're leaving out those foods that are high in, processed things and trans fats, etc. But part of this is our gut microbiome actually reacting to the fact that we're primarily using ketones as an energy source, so it makes some changes according to that. Now, a benefit that I didn't explicitly add to this list here is improved cognition for most folks. And that's a result of decreased inflammation, as well as stable blood sugar levels, i.e. stable energy, and honestly, the positive gut microbiome changes. So you almost have like a trifecta working in your favor in terms of mental clarity. And if you just kind of think about this state of ketosis from a historical standpoint, it really makes sense that our body would have adapted to ensure that we're very alert and mentally clear when we don't have food. Because when that opportunity to go hunt or find food presents itself, we need to have energy and be available to go do that. And our brain needs to work probably to catch an animal. All right, so if you've made it this far, you're probably interested in at least trying one of these. So how do we actually do it? So on the keto side, really what we need to do is keep our carbs to an absolute minimum. I would say this is in the neighborhood of below 30 grams per day. Now, what a lot of people get wrong with the keto diet, and many friends that I've spoken to who say, oh, keto sucks, it didn't work for me. Here's what they're getting wrong. Because they're not actually tracking their food, they're eating a lot more carbs than they think they are. You have to track every little condiment. If you have a sugar packet in coffee, that's like 6 grams of sugar right there. Even if you're just putting milk in your coffee, all those things add up over time. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a small amount of carbs, and after you've experimented and learned what keto feels like for you after a while, you get a really good idea of how much certain numbers of carbs feel in terms of like your ketone levels and how your energy and your mood feel. But when you're starting off keto, be super, super, super strict with your carbs. You don't want to be in this sort of like metabolic purgatory where you're kind of in between using carbs for an energy source and you're kind of starting to use fat, but your body doesn't really try to do it because it still has some carbs. That sucks. Trust me, it feels like crap. It's like being really late in a diet when you're super shredded and you're just starving all the time and feel like crud and have no energy. So be super, super strict with your nutrition tracking and keeping your carbs as low as feasibly possible when starting a keto diet. Now for fasting, don't eat. Now a couple things that both of these have in common, which are mostly related to glycogen depletion and electrolyte depletion. Number one, for both of these, you're gonna wanna stay hydrated. And as point 1B of stay hydrated here, I have keep track of electrolyte intake. Because if you're flushing electrolytes and your body doesn't have any way to actually hold on to the water that you're putting into it, which it does by electrolytes. This is, tied to like osmolarity and things like that. Not osmolarity, salinity. I don't know, one of those two. But if you don't have electrolytes in your system, you're not actually gonna retain water. And there can be, during the first couple days of either a keto diet, to include carnivore or some type of fast, there can be pretty significant electrolyte depletion. So you wanna make sure that you're replacing those. Now, if you're doing a strict fast for, let's say, religious reasons, and you absolutely don't want to take anything in, maybe other than water or maybe even water, I would kind of prepare in advance for this and front load hydration and front load electrolytes the few days leading up to your fast. So really increase your sodium, potassium, magnesium intake the few days before you start your fast. Otherwise, you can just include these electrolytes while you're fasting because they don't have any calories. Number two, from a health standpoint, most 0-calorie beverages or even some very, very low calorie beverages like a 5-calorie Diet Coke or something like that will not have a huge impact on the metabolic effects of your fast. Now again, if you're doing it for religious reasons or you want to just be more strict, cut those out. But usually black coffee, tea, pretty much good to go. Specifically for ketogenic diets, I love broth, any sort of like bone broth, even chicken stock, beef broth, stuff like that can be really awesome for replenishing electrolytes as well as getting a little bit of protein in depending on the type of broth. And then one last one that I found very helpful personally is including something like apple cider vinegar, lemon, or sauerkraut. Now I know sauerkraut is food and you're eating, so it doesn't really work with a fast. But for me, apple cider vinegar has a very pro-regulatory effect on my blood sugar. Now here's kind of a pro tip. If you're having a hard time with hunger during the first few days of a keto diet or even during a fast, I personally love making like a broth with some mixed in apple cider vinegar or even like bouillon cubes in hot water with apple cider vinegar. Something about the taste of that to me is just amazing. Pickle juice also awesome. But most of the energy crashes and slumps that you're gonna experience that aren't as a result of legitimate sugar detox, because we're addicted to sugar as Americans, but most of those will come from electrolyte deficiencies. So if you can stay on top of your hydration and your electrolytes during a keto diet or a fast, it's really, really gonna help you out. All right, so here's how to win at fasting or keto and life. Number one, prepare. Make sure that you have the right stuff on hands. This means the electrolytes you need. This means if you need some apple cider vinegar. This means if you need maybe some different drinks that you wouldn't normally drink just to help you kind of get through the hunger periods a little bit more. Prepare and make sure you've got everything on hand and ready to go. Number two, share. This could be sharing with family members. Hey, hubby, I'm gonna do a 2-day fast. I'm probably gonna be hungry and cranky at some point, but keep that in mind and maybe don't eat Oreos in front of me. Also, this could be sharing this with your primary care physician or a healthcare provider. I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is just my experience and what I've learned over the years. And number three, care, which is essentially just be effortful. Remember that hunger is gonna come in waves. There's usually a hump with fasting, especially if you're doing a prolonged fast. I found that every time I've done like a 3 or 4 day fast, pretty hungry in the first day, but then after that, like day 2, it really tapers off. Day 3, you're cruising. It's pretty easy, honestly. And so the verdict is keto versus fasting. They both work. They're awesome for different things. Figure out which one works for you. Try a couple different things, a couple different times, and see what's best for your life. All right, guys, that's it for this one. I really appreciate your time and attention as always. 2 questions. Have you liked the video? Because we're at the end, so you're running out of time. Have you subscribed? It's just a question. If you have, you are the winner. So I appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next one.